The year was 1877, and the sun over the territory was a merciless white eye. It baked the alkali flats into a cracked plate and bleached the sky a pale, aching blue. The stagecoach, smelling of sour sweat, old leather, and the sickness of the passenger beside her, finally slowed its bone-jarring rhythm. Clara Finch pressed her forehead against the hot, dirty glass. For 6 days she had been rocked and thrown, her body a collection of new bruises. She was 22 years old, and she felt closer to 100. Back east, there was nothing left. The sickness had taken her father, and then the bank had taken the house. Poverty was a cold, gray fog she had walked in for 2 years, and the letters in her lap were the only promise of sun. She clutched the small, worn carpet bag on her knees. It held everything she owned: 2 spare dresses, a brush, and the silver locket her mother had worn. Tucked inside her bodice, wrapped in oilcloth, were the letters. 10 of them. They were written in a strong, clear hand, speaking of honor, stability, and the building of a new life. They were signed by Captain James Holloway, United States Army, Fort Dry Creek. The coach groaned to a halt. The driver yelled something coarse. Dry Creek was not a town. It was a scar. One long, wide street carved from red dust. On one side, a row of false-fronted buildings, a saloon with a painted lady smiling badly on the sign, a general store, and a post office that leaned like a drunk. On the other side, a blacksmith's forge hammered a painful rhythm into the air, and further down, the low, grim shape of a brothel. At the end of the street, stark against the endless plains, stood the palisade walls of the fort. The air smelled of hot metal, whiskey, manure, and an underlying scent of wood smoke that seemed older, sadder. Clara stepped down onto the loose planking of the boardwalk, her legs shaking. The cheap black wool of her traveling suit was heavy with dust and perspiration. She felt the eyes on her instantly. Men paused, hands halfway to their mouths with cigars or whiskey glasses, their gazes stripping her down to the bone. They were not looking at a person. They were assessing livestock. Women, scarce and hard-faced, glanced from doorways with expressions ranging from pity to sharp, territorial contempt. This was not the civilized outpost the letters had implied. This was a raw, bleeding edge of the world, and she had just thrown herself over it. A man separated himself from the shadow of the fort's entrance. He was tall, and the blue of his cavalry uniform was immaculate against the red dust. His boots shone. He moved with an authority that silenced the murmurs as he approached. Miss Clara Finch. His voice was deep, clipped, educated. Yes, she tried to find the voice of the man who had written the letters, Captain Holloway. He nodded once. He did not smile. "You are punctual." He looked her up and down, a slow, methodical appraisal. His eyes, a pale, flat gray, were not welcoming. They were calculating. He was not greeting a bride. He was inspecting a shipment. He had promised respect. This felt like ownership. It was a difficult journey. "Sir," she said, her voice small. "The West is difficult, Miss Finch." He took her single valise from her hand. The gesture was not polite. It was a simple taking. "The barracks are not suitable. I have secured you lodging at the postmaster's house until the formalities are concluded." He turned, expecting her to follow. She did. A small, dark bird trailing a hawk. As she walked, she clutched the locket through the fabric of her dress. She was safe. She had arrived. She had a benefactor. Then why did her stomach feel packed with cold river stones far beyond the town, on the high ridge that separated the dusty plains from the broken canyons? A different man watched. His name was Tahan. He sat his horse with an easy stillness that made him part of the land itself. He and the 3 others with him were ghosts against the skyline, their painted ponies blending with the dun-colored rock. He did not need a spyglass to see the town. He could smell it from here, the stink of the tannery, the white man's sour whiskey, the smoke from their iron fires. He watched the stagecoach arrive, a big yellow beetle crawling in the dust. He saw the woman get out, a dark speck of wool in the blinding heat. He saw the soldier in his blue coat claim her. Another one. They brought their women like they brought their cattle, expecting the land to simply accept them. Tahan's eyes were the color of wet stone, sharp and deep. There was no savagery in them, only a profound, weary intelligence. He was not watching the town with hatred. He was watching it with the detached curiosity of a man observing a nest of frantic, dangerous ants. He saw their fences, their noise, their constant, angry motion, and he saw the madness in it. They were trying to own the wind, and they would kill anyone who told them it was impossible. His companion shifted, murmuring in the Comanche tongue about the soldiers at the fort. Tahan silenced him with a glance. The soldiers were a symptom. The railroad, pushing its iron snake further west every month, was the disease. His people were being pressed, hunted for the crime of existing on the land that had always been their home. He watched the blue-coated soldier lead the new woman toward the fort. He watched until she was gone. Then he turned his horse, and he and his men vanished back into the heat shimmer, leaving the ridge as empty as it had been for 1,000 years. Clara followed Holloway, her gaze fixed on his rigid back. The sounds of the town pressed in on her. In the saloon, someone was playing the piano badly. A woman laughed, a high, broken sound. "You will find Dry Creek to be a fine posting once you are accustomed to it," Holloway said. Not looking back, "It is the gateway to the new territories. The railroad survey is proceeding. We are bringing order to this land." Clara nodded, though he could not see it. Order felt very far away. She heard men talking outside the general store. Their voices were loud, full of bragging and tobacco spit. "Another raid up north, Comanche," one said. "Burned a whole homestead. Ought to wipe every last one of them red devils out." "Holloway's new campaign will do it," another replied, spitting. "He ain't soft. He'll clear 'em out by Christmas, make way for the tracks." Clara's hand tightened on her bag. She had read about the Indian troubles in the eastern papers. They were stories of wild, painted savages, of midnight massacres and stolen children. She looked instinctively toward the empty, shimmering horizon. A chill ran down her spine despite the 100-degree heat. She was terrified of them. But a small, contrary thought, one that had often gotten her into trouble, surfaced in her mind. Her father used to say that if you only hear one side of a story, you have not heard the story at all. She pushed the thought down. Captain Holloway was a soldier. He would keep her safe. As they passed the saloon, the Golden Spike, she saw the woman in the doorway clearly. The woman's red dress was stained, her hair a brassy yellow. She looked older than Clara, but she might have been younger. Her eyes met Clara's, and they were filled with a bottomless cynicism. This woman, who the town probably called Maggie, looked at Clara, then at Holloway's back, and gave a tiny, almost imperceptible shake of her head. It was a warning. Clara looked away, her face burning. At the fort's main gate, a young private snapped to attention. He was barely a man, perhaps 19, with a face full of freckles and nervous eyes. "Captain," he said, his voice cracking. "At ease. Private Eli," Holloway said dismissively. The private, Eli, glanced at Clara. His eyes were not cold like the captain's, nor assessing like the townsman's. They were soft. He looked at her with a plain, uncomplicated pity, as if she were a lamb he had just been ordered to lock in the wolf's pen. He lowered his gaze immediately when Holloway turned. Just inside the gate, a man was leaning against the trading post, whittling a piece of wood. He was a puzzle. His hair was long and black, tied back with a leather thong, but he wore a soldier's faded trousers and a buckskin shirt. His face was sharp, caught between two worlds. He looked up as they passed. His eyes, dark and knowing, lingered on Clara, then shifted to Holloway. He said nothing, but his gaze felt like a judgment. "That is Samuel Lone Fox," Holloway said, his voice tight with disdain. "A half-breed. We use him to speak to the savages when we must. Do not associate with him." Clara just nodded. She was in a place where everyone was categorized soldier, savage, half-breed, wife. She was beginning to understand that her own category, wife, was just another word for property. Holloway stopped at a small, neat cabin near the parade ground. "The postmaster and his wife will see to you. We will be married in 3 days. The circuit judge is due. You will want to be rested." He did not ask her. He told her. He left her on the doorstep. Clara watched him stride away, his back a rigid wall of blue wool. The letters in her bodice suddenly felt like lies. The man who had written of a partnership of equals was the same man who had just inspected her like a horse and warned her away from the half-white interpreter. The sun was beginning to set, staining the sky a violent, bloody red. A rifle shot cracked in the distance, sharp and lonely. It was probably just a hunter, she told herself, but it sounded like a door slamming shut. She had fled the fog of poverty only to land in a furnace, caught between the cold iron of the fort and the unknown fire of the wilderness. And she was utterly, terribly alone. The postmaster's wife was a small, faded woman named Mrs. Gable. Her hands fluttered like trapped moths, and she did not quite meet Clara's eyes. She showed Clara to a room that was little more than a closet, stiflingly hot, containing a narrow cot and a porcelain basin. It was clean, but it felt like a cell. Clara sat on the edge of the cot, the cheap carpet bag still clutched in her lap. She had not eaten. She had not washed, but she was too numb to feel the grime. Mrs. Gable brought her a glass of lukewarm water with a film of alkali dust on its surface. "You rest, dear," the woman whispered, her eyes darting toward the closed door. "The captain is an important man. He provides for this town. You are a lucky girl." Clara looked at the woman's chapped, nervous hands and saw no luck. She saw only fear. Captain James Holloway returned 2 hours later, just after dusk. He did not knock. He simply entered the small room, filling it with his presence. He had changed from his dusty uniform into a clean one, the brass buttons glinting in the single candle's light. "You have settled in." "I see," he stated. "The room is adequate." "Thank you," Clara said, forcing her voice to be steady. She stood up, a gesture of respect that was also a defense. He walked to the small, grime-streaked window, looking out at the dark parade ground. "I trust your journey was not a waste. I have expectations. Miss Finch, this post is a lonely one, but it is not without standards. A wife is a necessity for a man at my station. She must be orderly. She must be obedient. She must be presentable." His words, so different from the poetic lines in his letters, landed like small, cold stones. "And the letters you wrote, Captain." They spoke of partnership, of building a home together. He turned slowly. His flat gray eyes held no warmth. "Letters are a formality. Miss Finch, a means to an end. This is reality. We have a contract. A contract. I paid the sum of $75 for your passage. I have paid for this lodging. I have, in effect, made a significant investment in your arrival. I expect that investment to be honored. The illusion of romance, of a gentle hand reaching out to save her, shattered completely. He had not sought a partner. He had purchased an asset. I am not an investment. Captain, I am a person. You are a woman, alone and penniless, who agreed to terms. My terms." He moved closer, and she had to fight the urge to step back. "We will be married in 3 days. That is all you need to concern yourself with." He left her then. She heard his boots strike the boardwalk outside, a hard, rhythmic sound of ownership. She sank onto the cot, her body trembling. The man she had traveled 2,000 miles to marry, the man she had trusted with her future, did not exist. Sleep was impossible. The air was too hot, her mind too full. In the middle of the night, she heard voices from the postmaster's office, which shared a thin wall with her room. Holloway was back. He was speaking with another man, a younger officer. "She is more plain than the daguerreotype suggested," Holloway said, his voice casual. "But she is healthy and her teeth are sound. She will do it." "Are you certain she's the one?" Sir, the younger man asked. "I heard you had correspondence with several." Holloway laughed. It was a dry, rasping sound without humor. "Of course I did. Lieutenant, I am not a fool. My secretary has a fine hand for poetic nonsense. We sent out 12 inquiries. This one," he paused, "was the cheapest reply. And the most desperate. Desperate women are the most compliant. They are a convenient supply for the border forts. Lieutenant, remember that." Clara pressed her hand to her mouth to stifle the sound that rose in her throat. A choking sob of humiliation. Cheapest, convenient supply. She was nothing but a commodity, selected from a catalog of the desperate. The next morning, she felt raw, as if she had been skinned. Holloway came to her room shortly after dawn. He was freshly shaven, smelling of lye soap and leather. "Good morning. Miss Finch, we have business to attend to." He placed a set of folded papers on the small, rickety table, the marriage license. "The judge is not here, but this document, signed by you, binds you to my protection and formally registers your intent. It legalizes your presence here as my fiancée." She looked at the papers, at the line waiting for her signature. I need time to think." His eyes narrowed. The civility, thin as it was, vanished. "Think there is nothing to think about. You are here. You have no money, no return passage. You belong to me. Sign the paper." "I cannot," she whispered, her hands shaking. "Not after what I heard, the things you said last night." His face did not change, but his eyes went dead. "Eavesdropping. Miss Finch. An ugly habit. I will have to break you off." He reached out, not to strike her, but to take her hand. His grip was not gentle. His fingers closed around her wrist like an iron manacle. The pressure was immediate, painful, and precise. He was not just holding her, he was showing her. "Let us be clear," he said, his voice a low, cold hiss. "You have two choices. You will be Mrs. James Holloway. You will be respectable, and you will do exactly as I command, or you will be uncooperative." He tightened his grip, making her wince. "The alternative to my protection, Miss Finch, is not the stagecoach back east. It is Maggie's place, the Golden Spike. A woman who does not cooperate with a man of my standing often finds herself in the service of many men. Do you understand my meaning?" Tears of pain and fury stung her eyes. This was not a proposal. It was an ultimatum. She was trapped. A sudden commotion from the street broke the terrible silence. Shouts, the sound of many horses. Holloway released her wrist, annoyed by the interruption. He went to the window, pulling the curtain aside. "Damn them," he muttered. He grabbed Clara's arm, this time by the elbow, and pulled her from the room. "Stay behind me and be silent." He propelled her onto the boardwalk. The entire town of Dry Creek had frozen. Men in the street, teamsters, and prospectors had flattened themselves against the building walls. The soldiers at the fort gate had their rifles at the ready. Riding slowly down the center of the dusty street was a delegation of Comanche. There were perhaps 10 of them. They were not in war paint. They were lean, clad in buckskin and leather, their long black hair unbound. They rode with a stillness, an unnerving dignity that made the nervous. Armed white men looked like frightened children. Their faces were like carved, impassive stone. They were here on a negotiation, not a raid, but the air crackled with a tension that was thicker than the dust. The leader rode slightly ahead. He was a man in his prime, with broad shoulders and a face that spoke of hard sun and harder decisions. He was Tahan. Holloway's hand was a vice on Clara's arm, holding her in place beside him, a public display of his new possession. The Comanche delegation was forced to stop, blocked by a line of blue-coated soldiers. During that taut, breathless pause, the leader's gaze swept the town. He looked at the saloon, at the frightened faces in the windows, at the soldiers aiming rifles at his chest. He showed no fear. Then, his eyes found Clara. She expected to see savagery. She expected the bloodthirsty demon from the stories. What she saw struck her dumb. His eyes were dark, almost black, and they were filled not with hate, but with a profound, weary sadness and an assessing, sharp intelligence. He looked at her, and in one terrible, shared second, his gaze seemed to pass right through her, acknowledging her. He saw the captain's bruising grip on her arm. He saw her pale, terrified face. His expression did not change, but she felt seen. He was not looking at her like a piece of property. He was looking at her like a fellow prisoner. Holloway, feeling her go rigid, yanked her arm. "Do not look at them," he spat, his voice low. "They are nothing but wolves waiting to be shot. Vermin. This land will belong to us, and we will get it by clearing them out." Tahan held her gaze for 1 second more, then turned his head. His attention shifted to a group of white children who were peeking from behind a water barrel, playing with a small wooden hoop. He watched them laugh and roll their toy along the dusty street, on the very ground where his ancestors had hunted the great bison herds for 1,000 years. A muscle in his jaw tightened. Then he looked forward, toward the fort, his face a mask of stone once more. The meeting was a disaster. Clara watched from the window as the Comanche left, their backs rigid. The negotiations failed. Holloway returned in a foul mood. That afternoon, Clara could not breathe in the small room. She had to escape. She walked to the edge of the fort, near the general store, just needing to feel the open air, even if it was a prison. "Heard him. Did you, the real man?" Clara jumped. Maggie, the woman from the Golden Spike, was leaning in the alley between the store and the saloon. She was smoking a thin cigarillo. Clara, ashamed, could not speak. Maggie took a long drag, her eyes squinting in the sun. "I saw that look before, usually on myself. I was a mail order, too, you know, back in '69. Though he was a fine gentleman, a rancher, wrote like a poet." She laughed, a short, bitter sound. "Lasted 2 months before he broke my arm. Lasted 3 before he sold my contract to the saloon to pay a poker debt." She stepped closer, her voice dropping. "Do not ever think you are lucky just because a man claims you. We are not cheap goods, honey, no matter what they pay for shipping." Maggie tossed her cigarillo into the dust and walked back into the saloon's shadow, leaving Clara alone with the truth. That night, Clara knew she could not sign the papers, but she also knew she could not escape. She was back in her room, Holloway at the officer's mess, the fort quiet. She was looking at her small bag. What if she just walked away, walked into the plains? The Comanche would find her, or she would die of thirst. Her eyes fell on Holloway's leather satchel, which he had left on the desk. He was careless, arrogant. He did not see her as a threat. She was just a convenient supply. A cold fury, something she had never felt before, rose in her. She did not know what she was looking for. Money, a weapon, anything. She opened the flap. Inside, beneath a ledger, was a rolled map. She unrolled it on the desk. It was a detailed drawing of the fort and the surrounding area, but there were markings on it, words written in Holloway's precise, cold hand. She read the words, and the blood in her veins turned to ice. There was a large circle drawn around the main parade ground, labeled Wedding Feast. 3 days. There was an arrow pointing from the plains, labeled Comanche Delegation, Peace Lure, and at the entrances to the fort, and on the rooftops of the barracks, there were small crosses. Each was labeled Sharpshooters, Ambush Point. Her heart stopped. This was not just a wedding, it was a trap. Holloway was using their marriage, her marriage, as the excuse for a celebration, a public feast to which he would invite the Comanche leaders under the false flag of a new peace treaty. And when they were inside, unarmed and unsuspecting, he planned to slaughter them. She was not just a commodity. She was not just a wife. She was the bait. The next 3 days were a blur of suffocating, polite terror. Mrs. Gable, acting on Holloway's orders, provided Clara with a dress. It was not a real wedding gown, but a simple white lawn dress, probably intended for a Sunday social. It was modest, with a high neck, but it felt like a shroud. Clara moved as if underwater. She ate what was put in front of her. She nodded when spoken to. She had signed no papers Holloway, busy with his festivities, had not pressed her again, assuming her silence was assent. He had not touched her again. He simply treated her as a piece of furniture that was now in its proper place. She tried, once, to warn someone. She saw Private Eli carrying a water bucket across the parade ground. She walked toward him, her heart hammering. "Private!" He stopped, his eyes wide with something like fear. He looked around, terrified of being seen speaking with her. "Ma'am, tonight," she whispered, her voice trembling. "The party. It is not what it seems. You must tell someone. It is a—" She could not say the word. "It is a lie." Eli's face went pale. He knew. "Ma'am," he stammered, his gaze fixed on the dust at his boots. "The captain. He has orders from the top. They say the Comanche broke the last treaty. They say this is a military operation. It is not my place. Please, ma'am, do not speak of it. For your own sake." He hurried away, leaving her standing alone in the oppressive sun. He knew. They all knew. The entire fort, the entire town, was complicit in a premeditated massacre. The evening came. The sun bled out, leaving the sky a bruised purple. Torches were lit around the parade ground. Long trestle tables were laden with roasted meat, beans, and barrels of whiskey. A pair of fiddlers struck up a thin, scraping tune. Soldiers, off-duty townsmen, and the painted women from the Golden Spike mingled. Maggie was there, in a garish green dress, her eyes already hard and bright with liquor. She saw Clara and gave her a look of profound, agonizing pity. Holloway came for her. He wore his dress uniform, a dark blue sash across his chest. He looked handsome, a perfect soldier, a perfect groom. The lie of him was sickening. "Smile, my dear," he murmured, taking her arm, his fingers pressed just hard enough to be a reminder of his strength. "Our guests will be here soon. You are the very image of frontier purity. Make me proud." He led her to the center of the parade ground, a pale queen for a banquet of wolves. Clara's senses were painfully sharp. She saw everything. She saw the soldiers who were not drinking, the men who lingered near the shadows of the barracks. She saw the glint of rifle barrels on the rooftops, positioned perfectly to create a crossfire. She saw the heavy wooden gates of the fort, slightly ajar, with a dozen armed men waiting just behind them, ready to slam them shut. The fiddles played. People laughed. The air was thick with smoke and the smell of whiskey and roasting meat. But beneath it all, Clara could smell the metallic tang of bloodlust. Then, a hush fell over the crowd. The Comanche delegation arrived. They came on foot, as requested, a gesture of peace. Tahan was at their head, flanked by 2 older men, elders whose faces were maps of wisdom and sorrow. A few younger warriors followed, as promised in the negotiations that Eli had hinted at. They were unarmed. They carried only ceremonial pipes and a few treaty papers. They were walking into the trap to secure the release of a kinsman, a young man held in the fort stockade on a false charge of horse theft. Holloway had promised his release as a wedding gift to the people. Tahan's eyes swept the scene. He saw the feast, the soldiers, the drunk civilians. His gaze was wary, deeply suspicious. He saw Clara, standing beside Holloway in her white dress, a statue of ice. Their eyes met again, and in that instant, she tried to scream at him, to warn him with her gaze. "Run! It is a trap! Get out!" He seemed to receive the message. He paused, his body tensing, but one of the elders beside him spoke, and he was forced to move forward. To turn back now would be an insult, and they would lose their prisoner. They stepped into the center of the torchlight. Holloway raised his hand, and the fiddles stopped. He smiled, a broad, false smile that did not touch his cold, gray eyes. He held a tin cup of whiskey aloft. Honored guests, he boomed. "Friends, we gathered tonight for 2 reasons. First, to celebrate my union with this fine woman, Miss Clara Finch." A ragged cheer went up from the soldiers. "And second," Holloway continued, his voice hardening, "we gather to forge a new peace, a permanent peace. I raise my cup to my bride and to our new brothers." The Comanche he drank, and as he lowered the cup, he gave a short, sharp nod toward the rooftops. The world exploded. The first volley was a single, deafening crack of rifles from above. The 2 elders beside Tahan fell without a sound, their bodies ripped apart. The music, the laughter, the life, all of it was extinguished in a single, terrible moment. Screams tore the night. The civilians, the prostitutes, the townsmen scrambled for cover, overturning tables. The soldiers who had been pretending to drink dropped their cups and raised their pistols, firing into the small, unarmed group of Comanche. It was not a fight. It was an execution. Clara watched, frozen, as the young warriors, who had come in peace, fell one by one. She saw one, a boy no older than Eli, who had been carrying a small bundle. As he was shot, he fell, and the bundle rolled open. It was a child, a little Comanche girl, no more than 3 years old, who had been hidden in his blanket. She sat up in the dust, her black eyes wide with confusion, and reached for the fallen warrior, a soldier, His face contorted with rage, raised his rifle to shoot the child. Before he could fire, something moved in the smoke. Tahan had not been hit. The instant the first shot was fired, he had dropped, rolling beneath a table, coming up in the deepest shadows by the barracks wall. He moved with a speed that was not human. He was not a man. He was a panther. He had no rifle, no pistol. He had only a knife he must have secreted in his boot. The soldier aiming at the child screamed as Tahan's knife took him in the throat. Tahan did not pause. He vaulted over the table, grabbed a dropped pistol from a dead man's hand, and fired twice. 2 more of the ambushers fell. The parade ground was a vortex of chaos. Smoke, screams, men shouting orders, horses rearing in terror. Holloway's face was a mask of pure fury. His plan was ruined. He had wanted a clean execution, not a messy fight. He had wanted Tahan dead, and the man was still alive. A phantom dealing death in the smoke. Holloway saw Clara, her face white with horror, her eyes fixed on the slaughter. She was his witness. "You!" he roared, and grabbed her. He yanked her by the arm, dragging her back toward the postmaster's house. His hand was raised, his face purple with rage. He was going to beat her, silence her, perhaps kill her. He was holding her as a shield, a piece of property to be used and discarded. "You will be silent," he hissed, dragging her through the doorway. The doorway was suddenly filled with a dark shape. Tahan. He was bleeding from a graze on his arm, his chest heaving. His eyes were not human. They were the eyes of a storm, of vengeance itself. He saw Holloway and the woman he held. He did not know who Clara was. He did not care. He saw a woman, unarmed, in a white dress stained with blood, held captive by the blue-coated butcher. Holloway shoved Clara in front of him and raised his pistol before he could aim. Tahan threw the knife. It was not aimed to kill. It was aimed to disarm. The blade sank deep into Holloway's forearm, pinning his pistol hand to the wooden door frame behind him. Holloway screamed, a high, thin sound of agony and disbelief, his fingers spasming open as the gun fell. In that instant of shocked silence, Tahan was on him. He slammed his body into Holloway, driving him back. Clara, released, fell against the wall. She saw Private Eli in the doorway, his rifle raised, his face a mask of terror. He was shaking, his gun aimed at the center of Tahan's back. "Shoot him! Private! That is an order!" Holloway shrieked, struggling against Tahan. Eli's eyes met Clara's. He saw the blood. He saw Holloway's brutal face. He saw the Comanche warrior who was not trying to kill his captain, but simply disarm him. And he saw Clara, the woman he had pitied. Eli lowered his rifle by a single inch. It was a choice, a rebellion. He did not shoot. He turned his head, just slightly, as if he heard a noise from the parade ground. That hesitation was all Tahan needed. He struck Holloway in the jaw, a single, brutal blow that sent the captain crashing to the floor, unconscious. Tahan stood breathing heavily, the pistol in his hand. He looked at Eli, who was still frozen. He looked at Clara, who was trembling so hard she could barely stand. He had no time. The fort was now a hornet's nest. Soldiers were regrouping. He turned to Clara. He did not speak. He simply grabbed her arm. She did not resist. She looked from the unconscious, monstrous form of Holloway to the burning parade ground, to this savage who had just saved her. He pulled her out into the nightmare. The ground was littered with the dead. The little girl was gone, either rescued or dead. He whistled, a sharp, piercing sound. From the smoke, a painted pony, which must have broken free from the pickets, ran to him, in one fluid motion. Tahan threw Clara onto the horse's back, swinging up behind her. She was thrown face down across the horse's withers, her white dress hiking up, the wind knocked out of her. He kicked the horse into a desperate gallop. They charged toward the main gate. A soldier saw them and raised his rifle. Tahan fired the pistol, and the man fell. They burst through the gate, Eli watching them go, and plunged into the vast, dark wilderness of the plains. The last thing Clara heard was the voice of James Holloway, now conscious, screaming from the doorway, a sound of pure, impotent rage, howling her name into the night. She was not a bride. She was not a captive. She was, for the first time in her life, utterly and terrifyingly free. The wind tore the pins from her hair, and she clung to the horse's mane. Her body pressed hard against the warriors. As they rode away from the burning lie of civilization, the night was a screaming wind. Clara had never known such speed, such brutal, terrifying motion. She was no rider, and she was not sitting, but thrown across the horse's withers. Her face pressed into the coarse, sweaty mane. The arm Tahan wrapped around her waist was not a comfort. It was an iron band, holding her to him as the horse devoured the dark, unseen ground. Hoofbeats hammered a rhythm of panic. Behind them, she could hear faint shouts, the distant pop of a rifle, but they were quickly swallowed by the wind and the sheer, empty blackness of the plains. The air grew cold. It tore at her thin white dress, chilling the blood and sweat that soaked the fabric. The skirt, which had felt like a shroud, was now a tattered rag, ripped and muddied. She was in shock. Her mind played the scene at the fort over and over, the raised cup, the blast of the rifles, the elder falling, the small child in the dust, Holloway's face contorted with rage, Tahan's knife pinning his arm to the wood. She was the captive of a savage, fleeing a massacre he had barely survived. And yet, her body, held firm against his, felt a strange, illogical absence of one specific fear. The men in Dry Creek, Holloway foremost among them, had looked at her with an appetite. This man, his body hard muscle and his breath hot on her neck, held her with a focused, impersonal strength. He was not a predator, she realized. He was a survivor. He rode for what must have been hours, pushing the horse through dry creek beds and up rocky inclines, never slowing, always listening. Clara's body screamed in protest. Every joint ached. The skin on her knees and elbows, scraped raw from being thrown onto the horse, burned. Finally, in the deep blue dark just before dawn, he slowed the horse to a walk, its sides heaving. He had led them into a narrow cleft between high canyon walls, a place invisible from the open plain. He slid from the horse's back and, without a word, reached up. His hands went to her waist, and he lifted her down. Her legs buckled. She would have collapsed into the dust if he had not held her. He supported her for a moment, his grip firm on her arms, letting her find her balance. Then he released her and turned to the horse. Clara leaned against the rock wall, trembling violently. She was in a small, sandy wash, surrounded by sheer stone. It was a perfect hiding place. Tahan unsaddled the horse, his movements economical and swift, whispering to the animal in his own language, his voice a low, soothing rumble. He disappeared into the rocks and returned with a bundle of dry branches. In moments, using a flint and steel. He had a small, smokeless fire going in a pit shielded by stones. The small crackle of the flames was the first comforting sound she had heard since she left the east. He came to her. She flinched, pressing back against the rock. He stopped, his face impassive in the flickering light. He held out a water skin. She stared at it, then at him. He was wounded. The graze on his arm was long and bloody. His face was streaked with soot and another man's blood. His eyes, fixed on her, were exhausted but intensely alive. He pushed the water skin gently toward her. Water, he said. The English word was rough, a piece of gravel in his throat. She took it, her hands shaking so badly she could barely lift it. She drank. The water was warm and tasted of leather, but it was life. It cut through the dust in her throat and seemed to clear her head. When she finished, he motioned to her scraped arms and the bloody tear in her dress at her knee. He pointed to the water skin, then to the wounds. He wanted her to clean them. He produced a small leather pouch and took out a pinch of dried herbs, holding them out. For the pain, for the wound. She just stared, uncomprehending. He sighed, a small sound of impatience, and took the water skin back. He poured a little water onto a strip of cloth torn from his own shirt. He knelt in front of her. Clara went rigid. He was a savage. The story screamed in her head. He was going to touch her. He looked at her face, saw her terror. His own face hardened, but he did not stop. He took her arm. His grip calloused and surprisingly gentle. He did not look at her body, only at the injury. He carefully, methodically, washed the grit and blood from the raw scrape on her elbow. His touch was clinical, impersonal, like a doctor. He sprinkled the herbs on the wound. They stung, and she hissed. But the pain quickly faded to a dull warmth. He did the same for her other arm, and for her scraped knees, all without his eyes ever rising, his touch never lingering. He finished and sat back on his heels. He looked at her, then at the fire. "Safe now," he said. "No, go back tonight." He rose, took a piece of jerky from his pouch, and handed it to her. Then he walked to the mouth of the canyon, a dark silhouette against the first pale light of morning, and stood watch. Clara was left by the fire, holding the piece of dried meat. She was a prisoner. She had been abducted by a murderer. She should be terrified. She was. But her terror was a confused, tangled thing. The man who had just saved her life was the same man who had killed soldiers. The man who had been called a brute had just tended her wounds with a respect she had not been shown by the civilized man who claimed to love her. She looked at her options, and they were stark. To go back, to somehow escape and return to Dry Creek, meant returning to James Holloway, a man who would not see her as a person, but as a traitorous piece of property. He would punish her. He would break her. He would force the marriage, and her life would be a living hell, a cage of domestic slavery and brutal vengeance. To go forward meant, what? Staying with this man, going to his people, the savages who had been massacred tonight, who would surely hate her, a white woman, the emblem of their oppressors. She was caught between a monster she knew and a wilderness she feared. As the sun began to rise, painting the canyon walls a soft rose, a horseman appeared at the mouth of the wash. Clara's heart leaped into her throat, but Tahan did not move, did not raise his pistol. He knew this man. The rider was Samuel Lone Fox, the half-breed interpreter from the fort. His face was grim, and his horse was slick with sweat. He dismounted and spoke rapidly to Tahan in the Comanche language. The words were guttural, angry, and full of grief. Tahan's face, which had been a stone mask, tightened. He replied in a low, pained voice. Samuel turned to Clara. His dark, knowing eyes held a deep sadness. "He says you are awake. That is good." "What happened?" Clara whispered. "The child, the little girl." "Gone," Samuel said, his voice flat. "One of the warriors got her out, but we lost many. We lost the elders. We came for a prisoner, and he gave us a massacre." "He," Clara said. "Holloway, Holloway," Samuel repeated, his mouth twisting around the name. "Tahan says he saw you. He says you tried to warn him, with your eyes." Clara nodded, tears welling. "I knew. I found the map. It was a trap. The whole wedding was a trap." Samuel translated this. Tahan looked at her, his dark gaze unreadable. He spoke again. A short, difficult question. "He wants to know why you are here," Samuel said. "Why did he bring you?" "He saved me," Clara said. "Holloway was dragging me away. He was going to, I do not know. He was going to hurt me." "You're Tahan. He saved me," Samuel translated. A flicker of something, perhaps confusion, crossed Tahan's face. He had acted on instinct, saving a woman from a brute. He had not considered the consequences. The sun was higher now. The light was spilling onto the plains. Dry Creek was only a few miles away. They would be sending patrols. Tahan looked at Clara. He saw the tattered white dress, the bruises, the terror. He saw her glance, instinctively back in the direction of the fort. She was still thinking of escaping. He walked toward her. Samuel stood aside, watching. Tahan stopped directly in front of her. He was tall, and she had to look up at him. His eyes were not sad now. They were hard, clear, and demanded truth. He raised one hand and pointed. He pointed back, to the east, to the place of the fort. "Holloway," he said, his voice a rasp. Then, through Samuel, the words came, sharp and clear. "He will not stop. You are his. He will hunt you. He will find you. You go back. You are his dog. You are his horse. You are his." Clara's body trembled. He was speaking the truth she already knew. Then Tahan did something else. He raised his other hand, and he gestured to the west, to the open, endless plains, to the high, broken mountains on the horizon. It was a land of sun and wind and danger. He held that hand out. Not to her, but toward the wilderness. He says, "That is our land." Samuel translated, his voice soft. "It is hard. The soldiers hunt us. There is no food. It is a bad time, but it is free." Tahan's eyes locked on hers. He had shown her the two paths, the cage and the storm. He took one step closer. He was so close she could feel the heat radiating from his body. He looked into her eyes, and she saw the exhaustion, the grief, the burning anger. But beneath it all, she saw what she had seen that first day, a man who was true. He had no lies left. He spoke, not to Samuel, but to her. His own words, broken, but perfect. "Come with me." It was not a command. It was not a plea. It was a choice. The first real choice she had ever been given. He was offering her nothing. Not safety, not comfort, not a home. He was offering her the terrifying, unknown, an absolute chance to be free. Clara looked back at the land that held Dry Creek. She saw Holloway's cold eyes, his iron grip, the thin walls of her room, the laughing men, the complicit silence. She saw the cage she had traveled 2,000 miles to enter. She turned back to Tahan. She looked into his dark, steady eyes. She saw the death of her old life and the terrifying birth of a new one. She took a single, shuddering breath, and she made her choice. "I will go." Samuel did not need to translate. The change in her, the straightening of her spine, the sudden fire in her eyes, was a language Tahan understood. He nodded once. The bargain was struck. He turned, and in his own language, gave a curt order to Samuel. The time for hiding was over. They rode. Samuel provided Clara with a spare pair of trousers and a shirt from his saddlebag. She changed behind a rock, bundling the ruined, bloody white dress and leaving it in the dust. She mounted Samuel's spare horse, riding astride like a man, her muscles screaming in protest. But she did not complain. They traveled for the rest of the day, moving west, always west. They crossed a shallow, muddy river. They rode past the skeletal remains of a burned forest, the black trees like accusing fingers against the sky. Tahan pointed to them. "Soldiers," he said. Samuel explained. "They burned the winter camps. They burned the hunting grounds." Clara began to see the land not as an empty map, but as a home that was being murdered. That night, Tahan spoke to her again, with Samuel translating. "In our camp, you are not property, but you are not Comanche. You will have laws. You will work. Women have their own honor, their own strength. It is not your way." "I understand," she said. "It is not a paradise." "No," Samuel said, his voice grim. "It is not." Late on the second day, they crested a high mesa. Below them, hidden in a valley by a small stream, was the Comanche camp. It was not the savage den of her nightmares. It was a village. Dozens of tall buffalo-hide teepees stood in a great circle. Horses, hundreds of them, grazed on the valley floor. Children were laughing and running, playing a game with a small hoop. Women tended fires, their voices rising and falling in conversation. Old men sat in the sun, mending tack or smoking pipes. It was a world full of life, color, and community. But as their small party rode down the slope, a wail went up from the center of the camp. A woman, her hair cut short in mourning, ran out, screaming a name. The news of the massacre had arrived before them. The children stopped playing. The women's faces hardened. The men picked up their lances and bows. Every eye in the village turned to Tahan, and then they turned to Clara. The welcome was not warm. It was a wall of hatred, suspicion, and raw, terrible grief. She was the enemy, delivered into their hands. The wail of the mourning woman cut through Clara. The eyes of the camp were not just curious. They were knives. They were the eyes of people who had just lost sons, brothers, and elders, and they were staring at a woman who was the same color as the murderers. She was taken, not by Tahan, but by two stern-faced older women, to the center of the camp. Tahan and Samuel Lone Fox went immediately to the largest teepee, where the surviving elders and warriors were gathering. Clara was left standing by a fire, an exhibit of shame. Children pointed at her, their faces hostile. A man, his face painted in black for grief, spat on the ground at her feet. She was a captive. Her choice had led her from one prison to another, this one just as terrifying, but without walls. The council lasted for hours. Clara could hear the rise and fall of angry voices from the big teepee. She understood none of the words, but the tones were clear rage, grief, and argument. Finally, Samuel came out. His face was drawn and tired. "The council is divided," he said, keeping his voice low. "The woman who wailed. Her name is She Who Watches. She lost both her sons at Dry Creek. She wants you traded, back to Holloway, in exchange for the prisoner they still hold, or for guns." Clara's blood ran cold. "Back to him, no. He will kill me. Others say you are a spy, that you are a disease Holloway sent among us. They want you. Dealt with." "And Tahan," she whispered, her eyes searching for him. "He is speaking now." Samuel looked back at the teepee, listening. A single, powerful voice cut through the others. "Tahan." He was not shouting. He was reasoning. His voice a low, forceful torrent. After a long silence, Tahan emerged. He walked directly to the council fire where Clara stood. The entire camp watched. He stood before her, and with Samuel translating. He spoke to the elders, but his words were for everyone. "This woman is not Holloway's. She did not come as a captive. She came because she chose. She saw the white man's heart, and she turned her back on him. She did not bring the massacre. She is, like us, a survivor of it. I brought her. She is under my protection." He was vouching for her in this place of profound grief. He was spending his own honor, his own credibility, to defend her. The elders were silent. It was not an agreement. But it was a pause. The debate is over for now. She was Tahan's responsibility. She was given a small teepee, one that had belonged to a young warrior who would not be returning. It was empty save for a few sleeping robes. An old woman, Tahan's aunt, brought her a wooden bowl of stew. The woman set it down without a word, her eyes full of contempt, and left. Clara was alone, but she was alive. Life in the camp was a hard, daily struggle for which she was completely unprepared. The Comanche women were the spine of the tribe. They did everything. They cooked. They built the teepees. They cured the hides. They butchered the meat. They cared for the children and the horses. They were strong, loud, and did not suffer fools. And Clara was a fool. She could not start a fire without filling her teepee with choking smoke. She tried to help scrape a buffalo hide and ruined it, her soft hands blistering and bleeding within an hour. She tried to mend a moccasin and stabbed herself with the bone awl. The women watched her with a mixture of scorn and pity. They called her White Hands, a name that meant useless. One morning, the old aunt, whose name was Stone Woman, grabbed Clara by the arm and dragged her to the horse herd. She threw a rope at Clara and pointed to a young, half-wild pony. "I cannot," Clara said, shaking her head. Stone Woman barked a command. A young girl, perhaps 12 years old, showed Clara how to bridle the horse, her movements quick and sure. Then Stone Woman cupped her hands, motioning for Clara to mount. Clara, in her borrowed buckskin trousers, managed to get on the horse's bare back. It felt wide and dangerously unstable. The horse, sensing her fear, immediately bolted. Not far, but in a tight, bucking circle. Clara shrieked and fell, landing hard in the dusty, manure-filled corral. A group of women nearby laughed. It was a harsh, mocking sound. Clara's face burned with humiliation. Her tailbone ached. She was filthy. She wanted to cry. "Get up." The voice was Tahan's. He was leaning on the corral fence, watching her. She had barely seen him since the council. He was busy, his days spent in war councils or hunting. "I cannot do this," she said, her voice thick with tears. "You came here," he said. His English simple. "Here, we ride, or we die. Get up." He was not offering comfort. He was stating a fact. She pushed herself up, her entire body aching. The pony stood nearby, watching her. "He knows you are afraid," Tahan said. He entered the corral, approaching the horse, not her. He spoke to the animal, his voice low, and stroked its neck. The pony's ears relaxed. "You pull, he pulls." Tahan said, "You are hard, he is hard. You are sky, he is earth. Be windy, be water." It made no sense. He came to her side. Again, she mounted it. This time, Tahan held the bridle. "Breathe," he commanded. "Feel him." She tried. She tried to loosen her death grip, to move with the horse. He let go of the bridle. The horse took 2 steps. Clara panicked, grabbed the mane, and slid off again, this time landing on her feet. A sound escaped Tahan. It was a low rumble in his chest, a small, sharp puff of air through his nose. He was laughing. It was not a mean laugh. It was a genuine, surprised sound of amusement. Clara looked at him, her hair full of dust, her dignity in shreds. And she, in spite of everything, felt a small bubble of laughter rise in her own chest. She smiled, a real, weary smile. "I'm not wind," she said, brushing dust from her trousers. "No," he agreed, his eyes crinkling at the corners. The smile was gone, but the warmth remained for a second. "You are a rock. You fall." He put his hands on her waist and lifted her back onto the horse. Again. She spent all day falling, but by sunset, she could stay on at a walk. It was a small, painful victory. Tahan watched her that evening. As she limped to her teepee, he sat with Samuel, his face troubled. "It is a risk, my friend," Samuel said quietly, knowing his thoughts. "She is white, the wife of the man who killed our elders. She is not his wife," Tahan said in the Comanche tongue. "She is a woman with blisters on her hands. She laughs when she falls. She is not like the others. She is still the color of the enemy," Samuel said. "My wife was the color of the earth," Tahan said, his voice dropping. "The soldiers did not care what color she was when they shot her. They killed her and my son. They killed them for the land. This woman, she was betrayed by them, as we are." He looked at his hands. "I look at her and I want to hate her, but her eyes are the same as ours. They are the eyes of someone who has lost her world." Samuel knew Tahan's story. He had been a young warrior, a new father, when a cavalry patrol, drunk on whiskey and rumors of gold, had raided his peaceful winter camp 5 years before. Tahan had been hunting. He returned to find his teepee burned, his wife and 6-month-old son dead in the snow. His younger sister had been taken, sent to a school in the east, a prison where they cut her hair and beat the language from her. She died of a white man's sickness 1 year later. Samuel told this story to Clara, a few nights later, as they sat by a shared fire. "He does not hate you," Samuel explained, as Clara's heart ached with a pain she had not known she could feel for this man. "He hates what you represent. He hates the world that takes everything and gives back only bullets and paper lies." "I understand," she whispered, looking at Tahan, who was across the camp, teaching a small boy how to fletch an arrow. The proof of Tahan's words came a week later. A scout, one who had been watching Dry Creek, returned. He was exhausted, his horse nearly dead. He brought news. The town, Samuel translated for Clara, was in an uproar. Captain Holloway had told a magnificent story. He claimed his bride, a delicate flower from the east, had been savagely ripped from his arms at their wedding feast by the bloodthirsty Comanche. He, in his grief, had fought bravely. The massacre was a tragic defense of his stolen wife. The newspapers in the east had picked up the story. Clara Finch was a frontier martyr. Captain James Holloway was a hero, and the army, in response to the public outcry, was sending a full regiment, 500 men, to Dry Creek. Their orders were simple: hunt down the Comanche responsible and rescue the white woman. The news hit Clara like a physical blow. "He is using me," she breathed. "He is using my name to start a war, to finish what he started." She was now a danger to these people, the women who had begun to show her small. Grudging kindness now turned their backs again. She was the white woman who had brought the army. That night, a storm blew in from the north. The temperature plummeted, and a raw, icy wind screamed through the valley, flapping the tippy skins like cannon fire. Clara lay in her small lodge, her thin robes pulled around her, her body aching with cold and a deeper, more profound chill of fear. She was trapped. She could not go back. She could not stay. She must have slept, because the dream came. She was back at the fort. Holloway was raising his cup. The rifles fired. The child was in the dust. Holloway was grabbing her. his face a mask of rage, his breath hot on her face. "You are mine," he hissed, his hand closing on her throat. She woke with a choked cry, sitting bolt upright. She was trembling, her body slick with a cold sweat. The flap of her teepee opened. A gust of wind and ice tore through the lodge, nearly extinguishing the glowing embers in her fire pit. Tahan stood there, a silhouette against the gray. Howling storm. He had heard her cry. He stood for a moment, an animal testing the air, respecting the barrier of her lodge. She was a woman, alone. His culture had strict rules, but her fear was a palpable thing, a scent in the air. He saw her, a small, pale shape, huddled in the dark, shaking. He stepped inside, letting the flap fall shut, sealing them in together. The howl of the wind was muffled, but the teepee shivered around them. He did not speak. He walked to the fire pit and added 2 small, dry logs. He blew on the embers, and a small flame leaped up, casting a warm, dancing light on the painted skins of the lodge. He sat back on his heels, watching her. He was on the other side of the fire. "Bad dreams," he stated. It was not a question. She just nodded, unable to speak, pulling the thin robe tighter. He saw the gesture. He saw that she was freezing. He looked at her, his face a study of warring impulses. He stood, went to the entrance, and returned with a heavy, dark bundle. He unrolled it. It was his own sleeping robe, a thick buffalo hide, soft and heavy. He pushed it across the small space to her. "Thank you," she whispered. She wrapped it around her shoulders. It was heavy, and it smelled of him of wood smoke, horses, and clean, dry leather. It was warmer than anything she had ever known, but she still trembled. The dream was too close. The cold was too deep. He watched her for another minute. Then, with a sigh that seemed to rise from the center of the earth, he moved. He did not go to her robes. He sat down near her, his back against a willow support, on his own side of the fire. He was not threatening. He was just present, a guardian. He pulled his own blanket around his shoulders and shut his eyes, as if to sleep. Clara watched him. The small fire lit the hard planes of his face, the strong line of his jaw, the deep, surprising gentleness of his mouth in repose. The wind hammered the teepee, and a blast of cold found its way through a seam. She shivered, violently, and a small sob escaped her. His eyes opened. He looked at her. He saw her terror. He moved, this time sitting next to her, not touching her, just sitting, shoulder to shoulder, against the willow poles. He was a solid wall of warmth. "He cannot find you here," he said, his voice low. "You are safe." She did not know why, but she believed him. The trembling began to subside, replaced by the sheer, simple comfort of his presence. He did not try to hold her. He did not offer false words. He just shared his warmth. Slowly, undone by exhaustion, fear, and a desperate need for comfort, she leaned her head against his shoulder. He went rigid. She felt the muscles in his arm and back tense. He was a man who had not touched a woman in this way for 5 years. He was at war with his own instincts, with his grief, and with the undeniable pull he felt toward this woman. Clara felt his tension and started to pull away. Ashamed. "I am sorry." But he relaxed. He settled his weight, accepting her. He did not put his arm around her. He just let her rest there. His shoulder was hard, but it was steady. She closed her eyes, surrounded by the heavy, warm scent of the buffalo robe and the man beside her. The sound of the wind faded. The dream of Holloway receded. For the first time since she had left her house, she felt safe. Not owned, not protected like property, but simply safe. She fell asleep, her head resting on his shoulder. Tahan did not sleep. He sat in the dark, the fire dying to embers, and felt the light, warm weight of her head. He felt the fragile beat of her pulse against his neck. He was protecting a white woman, the cause of the new war, while the ghosts of his dead wife and son watched him from the shadows. And he felt, to his own profound shame and confusion, that he would kill any man who tried to take her from him. In the days that followed, Clara saw him in a new light. She watched his hands, calloused and scarred from battle and hunting, as he patiently showed a small boy how to tie a fishing line. She watched his eyes, So hard in counsel. Go soft as he spoke to the old blind woman, stone woman. He was not just a warrior. He was the heart of his people. She compared him to James Holloway. Holloway, with his clean hands and his poetry, who had a soul of ice. Tahan, with his bloody past and his broken English, who had a core of unshakable honor. She knew she had to help them. She went to him and Samuel. Her mind set. The map, she said, her voice clear and strong. The map I found in Holloway's office. It is proof. It shows the ambush. It names the wedding as a lure. It is his handwriting. Samuel looked interested. Proof, what could we do with it, if we could get it? Clara said, her words rushing out. If someone like you, Samuel, could sneak back into the fort and get it, we could send it to a newspaper in St. Louis. Or to a federal judge. Someone outside of Holloway's control. The law would have to act. They could not ignore proof of a massacre. She looked at Tahan, her eyes pleading. He listened to Samuel's translation. His face, which had been softening toward her, turned back into stone. He laughed. It was a cold, bitter sound that chilled her more than the storm. White man's law, he said, and spat on the ground. Samuel translated his words, his own voice heavy. He says the white man's law is a piece of paper he uses to wrap fish. He says it is a trick. He says, when the white man wants our land, his law says we are savages. When he wants our women, his law does not see. When he wants to kill us, his law calls it a military operation. There is no law for us, only this. Tahan touched the handle of the knife at his belt. He is wrong, Clara insisted, turning to Samuel. There are good people. There must be. He says he has never met them, Samuel finished, his face grim. He says we will fight them with steel, not with paper. He turned and walked away, leaving her standing with Samuel, the vast, unbridgeable gulf of their two worlds yawning between them. The scout arrived when the moon was a sliver, his horse staggering, its coat white with lather. His name was Hoopy, and he was known for his speed. He slid from the horse's back and fell to his knees, his body racked with exhaustion. He had run for 2 days without stopping. He brought the news that Tahan had been dreading. The whispers were true. Samuel Lone Fox translated the scout's gasping report, his own voice tight. They are coming, not a patrol, a regiment, from Fort Sill. He says, maybe 500 horses. A cold silence fell over the council fire. 500. It was a number they could not fight. They ride under Holloway's orders. Samuel continued, his gaze finding Clara. Holloway is using the story. The kidnapped bride. He has convinced the newspapers, and the newspapers have convinced the generals. They are not coming to negotiate. They are coming to be exterminated. They are burning the high plains as they come, killing the buffalo. They are driving us into the open. The trap was set. Holloway was not just hunting them. He was destroying their world, burning their larder and their winter pastures, forcing them to move or starve. The council began. It was not a debate. It was a desperate search for an answer that did not exist. The elders spoke first. We must run, said an old man, his voice thin. We must take the families and go west, into the Staked Plains. The soldiers will not follow us there. Their horses will die. A young warrior, his face streaked with black paint for the mourning of his brother, leaped to his feet. We run, we starve. The Staked Plains are empty. This is our land. These are the graves of our fathers. We fight here. We die here. It is a good day to die. The camp was split. To run was a slow death. To fight was a quick one. Tahan stood apart, his face a mask of stone. He was trapped between the ghosts of his ancestors and the future of his people. He saw his wife's face in the flames, his son. He knew what 500 soldiers looked like. It was a river of blue that swallowed everything. But to run, to give up this last piece of land, it was unthinkable. Clara, who had been standing in the shadows, her hands clenched, stepped forward into the firelight. Every voice stopped. Every eye turned to her. The white woman. The cause. She spoke, her voice shaking but clear. Her words aimed at Samuel, but her gaze locked on Tahan. He is using me. He is using my name to build his lie. Samuel translated, his voice flat. He is a hero, Clara continued. because the world thinks I am his stolen, helpless victim. What if I am not? The council murmured. They did not understand. What if I go back? Tahan's head snapped up. His eyes, which had been distant and full of strategy, were now sharp, black, and filled with a sudden violent fire. No, he said, his English a low growl. Clara ignored him, pushing her words out, forcing Samuel to translate. If I show myself, if I ride into Dry Creek, if I tell them the truth, it breaks his story. If the kidnapped bride is alive, and if she accuses him, he is not a hero. He is a liar. He is a murderer. This was her choice, her first real act of loyalty. She was offering herself as a weapon. Tahan strode across the circle and gripped her arm. His fingers were an iron band. You will not, he hissed. For her alone, he will kill you. And if I stay, she shot back, yanking her arm free, her own fury rising to meet his. What is your plan? Tahan, to run to hide in the mountains while these people starve. They are hunting us because of me. This is my fight. 2. He stared at her, stunned by her fire. She stepped closer, dropping her voice so only he and Samuel could hear. You offered me a choice. You said, come with me. I did not come with you to be a prisoner. I will not hide in a teepee, safe, while you and your men die for a lie that I can stop. If we just run, we are prisoners of the plains, just as I was a prisoner in that fort. I will not live as a prisoner, even with you. Her words struck him harder than any arrow. Even with you. He saw it then, in his desperate need to protect her. He was caging her, just as Holloway had. He was treating her like something he owned, something he could lose, not someone who could fight. He looked at her, truly seeing her. The blisters on her hands had become calluses. The sun had browned her skin. Her eyes, once wide with Eastern terror, were now clear and hard and looked just like the eyes of his own women. He took a long, slow breath. The fire in his gaze changed from anger to a grudging, profound respect. He turned back to the council. He spoke, his voice calm and full of authority. And Samuel translated. We will not run, and we will not fight his army. We will fight his lie. The white woman is right. We will cut the snake's head. He looked at Samuel. You will come. He pointed to Hoopy, the scout, and 2 other young warriors. You and you, 5 of us. We ride fast. We will ride tonight. The plan was made. It was insane. Clara, Tahan, Samuel, and the 2 warriors would ride back to Dry Creek. They would not attack the fort. They would sneak in. They would find the one man Clara thought might listen, Private Eli, the freckle-faced boy with guilty eyes. They would use him to get word to the other soldiers, or perhaps even the circuit judge. They would expose Holloway's lie to his own people. The camp moved with a quiet urgency. There was no time for sentiment. Stone Woman, Tahan's aunt, came to Clara. The old woman's face was still a harsh map of grief, but her eyes had lost their contempt. She pushed a bundle into Clara's hands, a dark buckskin shirt, sturdy trousers, and soft moccasins. She said something in her guttural tongue. She says, "Do not ride in a white woman's dress." Samuel translated, a rare, thin smile touching his lips. She says, "Do not get caught." They prepared the horses, the 5 fastest in the herd. Animals bred for silence and stamina. They packed water and dried meat, enough for 3 days. Tahan checked every cinch, every bridle, himself. He moved with a focused, lethal grace. He gave Clara a small, sharp knife in a beaded sheath. She looked at it, confused. His eyes met hers, and they were cold. "This is not to fight," he said, his English blunt. "The soldiers. If they catch you, before he touches you, you understand." A chill that had nothing to do with the night air ran down her spine. She understood. She took the knife and slid it into the waistband of her new trousers. They were ready to leave. The moon was a pale claw, casting just enough light to ride by. The camp was hushed, the people watching from the darkness of their teepees, their faces drawn with fear. Clara walked to the edge of the camp, taking one last look at the stars. The sky was so vast, so clear, it looked like a spill of diamond dust. She was afraid, so afraid her stomach was a knot of ice. But it was a different fear. It was not the fear of a victim. It was the fear of a soldier before a battle. Tahan came to stand beside her. They were silent for a long time. The only sound was the stamp of a restless horse and the sigh of the wind through the pines. "I'm afraid," she whispered. "Not to him, but to the darkness." "Good," he replied, his voice a low rumble beside her. "Fear keeps you alive. Fear keeps you fast." She turned to look at him. In the faint starlight, his face was a landscape of shadows, all hard plains and warrior's strength. "Tahan, that night, at the fort, why did you take me? You did not know me. You did not know I had seen the map. Why me?" He was silent for a moment, looking up at the stars. "I did not see you," he said, his voice so low she barely heard it. "I saw a cage. I saw his hand on you. I saw a man who owned a woman. I hate cages." A wave of emotion so powerful it made her dizzy washed over her. It was gratitude. It was an admiration. And it was a deep, powerful, aching pull that had been growing for weeks, a pull she had been too afraid to name. She reached out, her hand trembling, and laid it on his forearm. She could feel the hard muscle beneath the leather, the warmth of his skin. He did not move. He did not breathe. He just watched her face. Slowly, her courage building. She raised her hand to his cheek. His skin was rough from the wind. He closed his eyes, just for a second, and leaned into her touch, a small, involuntary movement. Like a wild animal accepting comfort for the first time, he raised his own hand, his calloused, battle-scarred fingers covering hers. He held her hand against his face. The connection between them was no longer a quiet hum. It was a tangible current, a taut wire of shared danger and suppressed longing. He leaned down. She rose on her toes. The kiss was hesitant, for only a heartbeat. Then it was hard. It was not the gentle, polite kiss of her Eastern dreams. It was a kiss of desperation, of truth, of a hunger that had been denied. It tasted of wood smoke, leather, and the cold night air. It was a brand. It was a promise. It was the first kiss of her life that was not a lie. He broke away, his breath ragged. He pressed his forehead against hers. His eyes were closed. "Clara," he whispered. It was the first time he had ever said her name. The sound of it in his rough voice undid her. He pulled back, and the warrior was back. The moment was over. His face was hard. "We're riding now." They rode as shadows, single file, Tahan in the lead. They moved through the darkness, using dry washes and the deep shadows of the mesas to hide their trail. Clara rode as they did, her body aching, her muscles screaming. But she did not falter. She was one of them now, a warrior riding to a different kind of war. They hid during the day, in a deep, brush-choked ravine, their horses muffled. That was when they saw the smoke. Tahan and Hoopy crept to the rim of the canyon. Clara, her heart pounding, crawled beside them. She looked out onto the plains, and the world went gray. The land was black. As far as she could see, the rich grassland was a scorched, smoking ruin. The soldiers had been thorough, and in the center of the blackened plain was a dark stain. It was a herd of bison, perhaps 100 of them. They had been shot and left. Their great, shaggy bodies were bloating in the sun, a feast for vultures. They had not been killed for food, or for hides. They had been killed to kill the Comanche. Clara pressed her hand to her mouth, a cold, sick bile rising in her throat. This was Holloway's order. This was the civilization he was bringing. It was a war on life itself. She finally, truly, understood. They rode again the next night, their hearts heavy and cold with rage. They were close to Dry Creek now. They moved with extreme caution, avoiding the ridges, staying low. They were moving through a thick stand of cottonwoods near a stream when Hoopy, at that point, raised a single hand. They froze. A flicker of light. A campfire. Ahead, and too close. Tahan dismounted, a gesture for silence. He, Samuel, and the young warrior, kills in the night, crept forward through the brush. They saw 2 men, white men, their clothes greasy with animal fat. Skinners. They were drinking from a brown jug, and tied to a tree, his face a swollen, bloody mask, was the young Comanche prisoner, the one they had tried to trade for at the fatal wedding feast. Kills in the night. The warrior beside Tahan made a sound, a low, choked animal noise. It was his brother. Before Tahan could grab him, The young warrior's grief and rage exploded. He raised his rifle and fired. He did not aim to kill. He aimed to scare. The bullet shattered the jug in one hunter's hand. "Ambush!" the man screamed. Diving for his own rifle, "No!" Tahan roared, but it was too late. The forest erupted in gunfire. Tahan fired, and one Skinner fell. The other scrambled back, firing wildly into the darkness as he ran. Samuel rushed forward and cut the prisoner free. He was alive, but barely. The damage was done. The second hunter was gone, crashing through the brush, yelling his head off, running toward the fort or the nearest army patrol, and from the east, faint but clear, came the sound they dreaded. A bugle call, answering the shots. "He will bring the soldiers," Tahan said, his voice flat and dead. He slung the liberated, half-conscious prisoner onto his horse. "Our plan is gone." He looked at Clara, his face a mask of cold fury. They were no longer hunters. They were the prey. Holloway's scouts, now alerted and angry, would be on their trail by sunrise. The time for subtlety was over. There was no time for a new plan. The bugle call was a death knell. There were 5, with a wounded prisoner. An army patrol was now alerted and sweeping the darkness. "We cannot go back to the camp," Tahan said, his voice a blade in the dark. He was looking at Clara. "They will follow our trail. They will find the women and children." "What do we do?" Samuel's voice was strained, as he tried to bind the young prisoner's bleeding wrists. "We split," Tahan said. He gave a rapid set of orders in Comanche. Hoopy and Kills in the Night would take the wounded warrior and ride hard, not west toward the camp, but south, toward the broken lands, leaving a trail so obvious a child could follow it. They would lead the patrol on a false chase. "And us?" Samuel asked. Tahan looked at Clara. His face, in the cold moonlight, was a mask of terrible resolve. The stealth plan was gone. The only weapon they had left was the truth, and it was a weapon that had to be used in the light. "We rode to Dry Creek," he said. "Now, before the patrol cuts us off. We rode to the fort. They will shoot us on sight," Samuel said, his voice flat. "They will shoot me," Tahan corrected. He looked at Clara. "They will not shoot her, not the kidnapped bride." The new plan was a desperate, suicidal gamble. Tahan would bring Clara and Samuel to the very edge of town by dawn. He would hide. Clara and Samuel, in plain sight, would walk down the main street. They would use her sudden, shocking appearance to buy them seconds, and in those seconds, she would have to shout the truth loud enough for the entire town to hear. It was madness. It was all they had. They rode. They left the false trail and cut east, hard and fast, the sound of the distant bugle fading behind them. Tahan pushed them relentlessly. They rode through the last hours of the night, the sky ahead of them turning from black to a bruised, sickly gray. Just as the first hint of sun touched the eastern horizon, they reached the shallow bluffs overlooking Dry Creek. The town was just waking up. A lone mule skinner was hitching his team. Smoke rose from the chimney of the blacksmith's forge. The fort was quiet, its gates still closed. Tahan dismounted in a cluster of rocks and juniper. "I will be here," he said, his eyes locking on Clara's. He held his rifle. "If he touches you." "No," Clara said, her voice shaking. "Tahan, if you ride in, they will kill us all." "This is not a fight of guns. Not yet. You have to wait. You have to trust me." He stared at her, his jaw tight. He hated this. He was a warrior, and he was sending a woman into the heart of the enemy, armed only with words. "Trust me," she said again, and she put her hand on his cheek. "You saved me. Now let me save you." He closed his eyes for 1 second, then nodded. He turned to Samuel. "Protect her, or do not come back." Samuel merely nodded, his own face grim. He, at least, had a pistol hidden under his buckskin shirt. Clara slid from her horse. Her legs felt like water. She wore the dark trousers and shirt Stone Woman had given her. Her hair was loose, matted with dust and sweat. She looked nothing like the Eastern lady who had arrived a few weeks ago. "Ready?" Samuel asked. She nodded. They stepped out from the cover of the rocks and began to walk, in the open, down the slope toward the main street of Dry Creek. The mule skinner was the first to see them. His jaw dropped, and the long whip fell from his hand. He pointed, his mouth working, but no sound coming out. A woman, Mrs. Gable, was sweeping the boardwalk in front of the post office. She looked up, saw Clara, and dropped her broom. She let out a small, muzzled shriek and covered her mouth, backing away. By the time Clara and Samuel reached the center of the street, the town was coming to a stunned, silent halt. Faces appeared in the windows. Men stepped out of the saloon, their morning whiskeys forgotten. They were staring as if they had seen a ghost. This was the kidnapped bride, the sainted victim, the girl who had been dragged screaming into the wilderness, and she was walking calmly into town, alive, unharmed, and dressed like a Comanche. "That is her," someone whispered. "That is Miss Finch. Sweet Mother of God." Another man breathed. "She is alive." The commotion brought soldiers running from the barracks. The fort gates swung open. Private Eli was at the front, his rifle in his hand. He saw Clara, and his face, full of freckles, went white with shock. "Ma'am," he said, his voice a squeak. Miss Clara did not stop. She walked until she was in the middle of the street, directly in front of the post office, a small crowd gathering at a safe distance. She had the town as her audience. "My name is Clara Finch," she said, her voice high and trembling, but carrying in the still morning air. "You all know me as the woman who was kidnapped." She pointed a shaking finger toward the fort. "That is a lie. I was not kidnapped. I was saved." A low, dangerous murmur started in the crowd, and then he appeared. Captain James Holloway strode out of the fort's main building. He was in full uniform, his face clean-shaven, his gray eyes like chips of ice. He saw her, and for a fraction of a second, his mask of command slipped. He looked purely, utterly stunned. He recovered instantly. He began to stride toward her, his face darkening with a theatrical rage. "Clara," he boomed, his voice full of false relief and authority. "You are safe, my God. Men, she is safe. Seize that half-breed she is with. He has brought her back. Do not touch him," Clara shrieked, as two soldiers moved toward Samuel. "He is with me. I came back to tell you the truth." She turned to the crowd, her voice rising to a desperate yell. "There was no kidnapping. The wedding was a trap Captain Holloway planted. He invited the Comanche to a peace talk, and he murdered them. I saw it. He used his own wedding as a lure for a massacre." A collective gasp went through the crowd. This was treason. This was an accusation that could hang a man. Holloway stopped, his face going pale, then flushing a dark, dangerous red. "The woman is sick," he yelled, his voice cutting through hers. "She is hysterical. She has been with the savages for weeks. They have corrupted her, tainted her mind." "I am not tainted," Clara cried, tears of pure fury now streaming down her face. "I am telling the truth. He killed unarmed men. He shot them down under a flag of peace," asked Private Eli. He knew it was a trap. Eli, who was standing frozen, looked as if he had been shot. Holloway's gaze swiveled to him, and the look in his eyes was pure murder. Eli looked down, his rifle shaking. "This is insanity," Holloway roared. "She is a traitor. She is consorting with the enemy. She is a whore for the savages. Arrest her. Arrest them both. That is an order." He pointed at her. "She is guilty of treason." A few soldiers, loyal to Holloway, surged forward, but others, including Eli, hesitated. They had heard the whispers. They had seen the bodies of the elders. They looked at Clara, at her burning, truthful eyes. For the first time, they doubted their captain. "I said, arrest her!" Holloway screamed at Eli. Eli looked at Clara, and then at his captain. He did not raise his rifle. He did not move. Coward Holloway spat. He turned to his two most loyal men, a pair of hard-faced sergeants. "Do your duty," one of the sergeants, a brute of a man, lunged for Clara. "Come here, you little Indian lover!" Samuel Lone Fox moved, pushing Clara behind him and drawing his pistol. "Stay back." The sergeant did not stop. He barreled into Samuel, grabbing his gun hand. The other soldier lunged for Clara, grabbing her by the hair and yanking her forward. Clara screamed in pain. The sound, high and clear, carried up the bluff. Tahan heard it. He had been watching, his body tensed like a bowstring. He had heard her voice, clear and strong. He had seen Holloway. He had seen the soldiers hesitate, and then he saw the scuffle. He saw the soldier grab her hair. He was moving before he had time to think. He was on his horse and galloping down the slope in a cloud of red dust, his rifle in his hand. The crowd screamed, a new sound of terror. "Comanche, it is Tahan. It is him." Tahan did not slow. He rode the horse straight into the crowd, which scattered like chickens. The soldier who held Clara's hair looked up, his face a mask of disbelief. Just as Tahan's horse slammed into him, the man flew backward, his grip torn free, in one fluid, impossible motion. Tahan leaned down from the horse, his arm wrapping around Clara's waist. He pulled her up, seating her in front of him on the saddle, just as he had done that first night. But this was not a rescue in the dark. This was a declaration of war in broad daylight. He reined the horse around, the animal rearing, its hooves flashing. He had his arm around Clara, his rifle in his other hand. Samuel was on his feet, his pistol aimed at the sergeants, and in the center of the street stood Captain James Holloway. His saber was drawn. His face was a white mask of incandescent hatred. "You," Holloway shrieked, his voice cracking. "You will not take her again, you filthy animal. She is mine." He lunged forward, his saber aimed at Tahan's leg. Tahan kicked the horse, wheeling it aside. The saber sliced the air. Tahan did not raise his rifle. He could have shot Holloway dead in a second. But he did not. This was not a murder. This was a duel. He swung his rifle like a club, knocking the saber from Holloway's hand. The sword clattered on the dusty ground. Holloway, disarmed, his chest heaving, looked at Tahan, then he smiled. He reached inside his uniform coat and pulled out a small 4.4 caliber boot pistol. "Die!" he screamed, and aimed it. Not at Tahan, but at Clara's face. He never fired. Tahan was off the horse, tackling him. They crashed to the ground in a cloud of dust, a tangle of blue wool and brown buckskin. Clara, thrown clear, scrambled to her feet. "He is the murderer," she screamed at the stunned soldiers, who stood with their rifles half raised, unsure who to shoot. "He killed the elders. He used me as bait. He is the liar." "He is a traitor, Holloway," and Tahan rolled in the dirt. Holloway was a trained brawler, but Tahan was a force of nature. He was pure, focused rage. He slammed his fist into Holloway's jaw. Once, twice. Holloway's head snapped back. Tahan grabbed the captain's head and slammed it against the hard-packed earth. Holloway went limp. Tahan rose, his chest heaving. He picked up Holloway's fallen pistol. He stood over the unconscious captain, and for a long, terrible moment, the entire town watched, breathless. He was going to execute him. He was going to shoot him in the head, right in the main street. Tahan Samuel yelled, "No, do not, it will bring the whole army. It will be a war we cannot win." Tahan's hand trembled. His face was a mask of grief and fury. He wanted this man dead. This was the man who had murdered his kin, who had destroyed his land, who had tried to kill the woman he looked at Clara. Her face was bloody where her hair had been pulled. She was watching him, her eyes wide, not with fear, but with trust. He lowered the pistol. He did not kill him. Killing him here, in front of his own men, would be an act of war that could never be undone. It would validate every lie Holloway had told. Tahan looked at the ring of pale, frightened soldiers. He looked at Eli, who was staring at his fallen captain with dawning horror. He walked to his horse, grabbed the reins, and swung up. He reached down a hand for Clara. She took it and he pulled her up behind him, her arms wrapping tightly around his waist. Samuel was already on his own horse, the prisoner's horse beside him. They turned and trotted, then galloped out of the town. No one fired a shot. The soldiers just stood, stunned into inaction, watching the ghost bride ride away with the warrior who had just defeated their captain. They were halfway up the bluff when a sound made them turn. Below, in the street, James Holloway was staggering to his feet. His face was a ruined, bloody mess. He was holding his head, screaming. It was not a sound of pain. It was a sound of pure, psychotic rage. He saw them on the ridge. He raised a bloody fist. "You will not escape," he howled, his voice echoing across the valley. "I will hunt you. I will bring the whole army. I will wipe your filthy race from the earth. Do you hear me? I will wipe you out. All of you." Clara's heart sank. Tahan had won the fight, but Holloway, in his defeat, had just declared war. They had won the truth, but they had lost the peace. The full regiment was still coming, and now its leader had a personal, burning reason to see them all dead. They rode back to the camp with Holloway's screams echoing in their ears. The victory in Dry Creek felt brittle, hollow. They had won the truth, but lost the war. The regiment was still coming, and now it was personal. When they arrived, the camp was already in a state of quiet panic. Scouts had seen the smoke from the regiment's campfires, only a day's march away. They were not 500, as first reported. They were closer to 800, with heavy supply wagons and wagon-mounted artillery. They were not a patrol. They were an army of annihilation. They are led by a colonel named Gideon, Samuel reported, his voice grim. He had spoken to a traitor on the trail, not a hothead like Holloway. He is a man who follows orders, and his orders, fueled by Holloway's lies, are to pacify this territory, permanently. The final council was held. The mood was not of defiance, but of despair. "We will run to the staked plains," the old elder said, his voice now broken. "It is the only way." And die of thirst, the young warrior shot back. "Let us die here, on our own land." With our weapons in our hands, Tahan stood silent. He knew what both men meant. To run was to be hunted and starved. To stay was to be surrounded and slaughtered. His people, his family, were trapped. He had no good answer. Clara stepped into the firelight. All her fear was gone, replaced by a cold, hard clarity. "You are right," she said to the young warrior. "You cannot run, but you cannot fight them either. Not with guns." She turned to Tahan. "We did not finish it. We shamed Holloway, but we did not speak to the men who have the real power. The regiment is not Holloway's. It is led by a different man, a man who follows orders. His orders are to kill us," Tahan said, his voice dead. "His orders are based on a lie," Clara insisted. "The lie that I was kidnapped. We have to tell him the truth, not just the town. Him, the new colonel." "He will not listen," Tahan said. "He must," Clara said, her voice ringing with a desperate certainty. "He is a soldier. Not just a butcher. He has a career. He has superiors. A public massacre. With a living, talking, white victim. It is a scandal. It will ruin him. We have something Holloway did not have. We have witnesses." Tahan looked at her, his mind catching the spark of her logic. "The plan is not to fight the soldiers," Clara said, her words rushing out. "It is to divide them. Samuel and I, we go back, one last time." "No," Tahan said. "The word a flat command. They will shoot you on sight." "They will not," Clara said. "Not if I am with witnesses. We go back. Tahan, we find Maggie. We find Private Eli, who is dying of his own guilt. We find the postmaster, the minister. We get them to stand with us. When that colonel arrives, we will not meet him with arrows. We will meet him with the truth. We will meet him with his own people." It was a terrible, desperate gamble, to walk back into the lion's den, hoping the lion would listen to reason. Tahan looked at the faces of his people. He saw the children, clinging to their mothers. He saw the old women, their faces etched with a life of loss. He had no other plan. He had only steel, and it was not enough. She had only words. Perhaps they were. He nodded once. The camp spent the night preparing, not for battle, but for a fast retreat, in case the plan failed. Clara and Samuel prepared to drive back to Dry Creek under the cover of darkness. Tahan took Clara aside, away from the fires, to the edge of the valley where the stream ran, the sound of the water a soft murmur under the vast, starry sky. The moon was nearly full, casting a brilliant, cold light, making the plains look like a sea of silver and black. They both knew what this was. It was goodbye, in case goodbye was all they had. "If this man, this colonel, is like Holloway," Tahan began, his voice rough. "He is not," Clara said, trying to believe it. "He is a professional. He will listen to logic. He is a white man," Tahan said, his voice flat. "He is here to take our land." There was no answer to that. It was the simple, unadorned truth. He looked at her, his warrior's face softened by the moonlight. He saw her courage, her small, determined chin, the way her hair, now loose and wild, framed her face. He saw the woman who had trusted him, who had fought for him, and who was now willing to walk back into the fire for his people. He reached out and touched her hair, his calloused fingers surprisingly gentle. "You are a Comanche woman now," he whispered. "You are braver than my warriors. You have a strong heart." Tears welled in her eyes, and she dashed them away. "I am just so afraid. Tahan, I am so terribly afraid." He pulled her to him. It was not a gentle embrace. It was hard, desperate, a drowning man clinging to his last piece of life. He buried his face in her hair, breathing her in. She was the first thing that had felt like life to him in 5 long, cold years. "Do not go," he whispered, his voice thick. "We will run. We will go to the mountains. I will hunt for you. We will live." She pulled back, just enough to look him in the eyes, her hands on his chest. "And we will be hunted. Your people will be hunted. I will not live like that, Tahan. I will not be the reason you lost your home. I will not be your cage." He stared at her, his heart breaking. She was using his own words against him. She was right. He leaned down and kissed her. It was not the fast, desperate kiss of their escape. It was a long, slow, deep kiss of men and women who have no tomorrows. It was a kiss of grief, and of a love so powerful it terrified them both. It was all the words they could not say. He lifted her, his arms strong, and carried her to a hidden place, a small clearing in the cottonwoods, sheltered from the wind. He laid down his own thick buffalo robe, the one she had used in the storm, and pulled her down on top of it. They lay facing each other, the silver moonlight spilling over them. He traced the line of her jaw with one finger. "Clara," he said, his voice breaking. She put her fingers to his lips. "Do not speak." There was nothing left to say. There was only this one night, balanced on the knife edge of war. He kissed her again, and his hands, which were so strong, so scarred, were now slow and patient. He unlaced the buckskin shirt, his fingers brushing the skin of her throat, her collarbone. She shivered, but not from the cold. He held her, his body a solid wall of warmth. And he did not take, he gave. He poured all of his grief, his respect, and his desperate, aching hunger into his touch. She met him with a hunger of her own. She was not a lady from the East. She was not a victim. She was a woman who had chosen her own life, and this was the man she chose. Her hands explored the hard, muscled plains of his back, the old, smooth scars that told the stories of his life. They came together under the open sky, their breaths mingling, their bodies a warm, moving tangle under the heavy robe. It was not polite. It was not civilized. It was real. It was a desperate, beautiful, and profoundly human act. It was two people from two shattered worlds, finding a whole, perfect, and unconquerable moment of peace in the very heart of a war. It was the first time for her, and for him. It was a rebirth. They lay tangled together afterward, their bodies slick with sweat, the cold air a sharp contrast. He held her, his arm heavy across her waist, his face pressed into her hair. They both knew they might be dead by this time tomorrow, but at this moment, they were alive. Before dawn, they rode. Clara and Samuel went east, toward the rising sun and the town. Tahan went to join his warriors, to prepare his defenses, his face a hard mask, his heart full of a new, terrible fear, the fear of loss. When Clara and Samuel arrived in Dry Creek, the town was a hornet's nest. The new regiment was camped on the plains just outside, a sea of white canvas tents and picket lines. The town was overflowing with blue-coated soldiers. But the atmosphere had changed. The story of Tahan's duel with Holloway had spread. The captain was in the infirmary, not badly wounded, but his pride shattered. And Private Eli, in a crisis of conscience, had talked. He had told 2 other privates what he knew. The lie was unraveling. Clara and Samuel went straight to the Golden Spike. Maggie was there, her eyes wide. "You are either the bravest girl I have ever met, or the biggest fool," she said. "I need your help." "Maggie," Clara said. By the time the sun was high, Clara had her army. It was not an army of warriors. It was an army of the town's outcasts, Maggie. 2 other prostitutes, Private Eli, who was trembling and pale but resolute, and the town minister, a man who had finally found his conscience. They walked as a group, with Samuel, to the regiment's command tent, a new officer, a colonel with a gray mustache and cold, pragmatic eyes. stepped out. This was Colonel Gideon. "Colonel," Clara said, her voice clear. "My name is Clara Finch, and Captain Holloway has been lying to you." The final confrontation was not a battle. It was a hearing, held in the dusty street. The regiment was assembled. The Comanche warriors watched from the bluffs, Tahan at their head, his lines drawn. The two sides were 1,000 yards apart, a field of death between them. Clara stood before a table, Colonel Gideon opposite her, and she told him everything. She told him about the letters, the ambush, the map, the murdered elders, the child in the dust. She told him about Holloway's brutality, his lies, and his psychotic rage. She lies Holloway, his head bandaged, shouted from the side, held between two guards. "Do I?" Clara said, her voice carrying. "Private Eli, tell the colonel what you told me. Tell him you knew it was an ambush." Eli stepped forward, shaking, but he did not back down. He told the truth. "Maggie," Clara called, "tell him what Holloway does to women he thinks he owns." Maggie stepped forward, her red dress blazing in the sun, and she told her story. The minister spoke. The postmaster spoke. Samuel spoke. The truth, piece by piece, was laid bare. Colonel Gideon listened, his face impassive. He was a political animal, not a brute. He saw his orders, based on a lie. And he saw the white, female witness who would telegraph this story to every paper in the East. He saw a career-ending scandal. When they were finished, there was a long, terrible silence. Clara stepped forward. "Colonel, this is not your war. It is Holloway's. But my people, Tahan's people, they will not run. If you attack, they will die, but they will take many of you with them. And the world will know you did it based on the lies of a disgraced man. She offered him the only way out. They will go," she said. "They will move west, to the Staked Plains. They ask only for a safe passage, a promise that you will not hunt them, and a treaty, a real one, for new lands, far from the railroad, lands where they can live." It was not justice. It was a compromise. They were still losing their house. Colonel Gideon looked at Holloway, his eyes full of contempt. He looked at his own men, who were listening, their faces a mixture of confusion and disgust. He looked at Clara, this impossible woman in buckskin trousers, negotiating a treaty in the street. He made his choice. "This regiment will not engage," he said, his voice booming. "Captain Holloway is hereby relieved of command and will be held for a court-martial for the murder of unarmed delegates." A gasp went up. "In exchange," Gideon said, his eyes hard on Clara, "the Comanche band will vacate this territory by sundown tomorrow. They will be escorted to the border of the Staked Plains, and they will not return." The guns did not fire. The charge did not happen. Clara stood, shaking, as the soldiers lowered their rifles. She looked up at the bluffs. She could not see him, but she knew he was watching. She had done it. She had not saved their land, but she had saved their lives. She had saved him. She had fought a war with the only weapon she had, and she had won. The silence that fell on the main street of Dry Creek was heavier than the dust. The confrontation was over. The climax a thready, anticlimactic declaration, not a volley of gunfire. Colonel Gideon, a man who saw the world in ledgers and reports, had made his calculation. A war based on a lie, with a living, eloquent white witness, was a career-ending disaster. A forced relocation, however, was simply policy. James Holloway, his face a swollen mask of blood and disbelief, was hauled to his feet by two soldiers. He was no longer a captain. He was a prisoner, his eyes wild and venomous. "Found Clara. You Indian slut!" He spat, the words thick. "He will tire of you. They will all be dead in a year, and you will die with them." Colonel Gideon struck him, a single, backhanded blow across the face. Silence. "Captain, you are a disgrace to the uniform. You will be held for court-martial." Clara watched them drag him away, his curses fading as they threw him into the fort stockade. The man who had haunted her, the man who had represented the entirety of her old life's desperate hopes, was nothing. He was just a pathetic, broken man in a cage. The threat was over. The monster was gone. She stood, trembling, the adrenaline leaving her body in a cold rush. She was surrounded by her strange, small army Private Eli, who was weeping quietly from relief and shame, Maggie, who had her arms crossed, a look of grim satisfaction on her face, and Samuel, who simply looked exhausted. Colonel Gideon turned to her, his gaze not unkind, but devoid of all sentiment. "Miss Finch, you have your arrangement. The terms are set. Your testimony will be required at Leavenworth. We will arrange transport." "Transport," Clara said, her voice small. "To the east," Gideon said, as if it were obvious. "Back to civilization. You are a heroine. Miss Finch, the newspapers will want your story." Clara looked at him, at his clean uniform, his trimmed mustache. He was offering her the world she had almost died to reach, a world of safety, respect, and order. "No, Colonel," she said, her voice suddenly steady. "My testimony will be given here, and then I'm leaving. But I will not be going east." Gideon's eyes narrowed. He looked at her buckskin trousers, her sun-darkened skin, her wild hair. "I see. I cannot advise it, ma'am. It is a hard life, a life you are not bred for. I am bred for truth. Colonel," she said, "and I have found it. I must settle my affairs." She left him standing there and walked, not to the postmaster's house, but to the small office where she had first heard Holloway's lies. She went inside. On the desk, just as he had left it, was the leather satchel. She opened it. The map, the one marked Lure, was still there. She took it. This was her evidence, and beneath it, she found the document, the marriage license, the one she had never signed. She looked at the blank line where her name was meant to be. She picked up the pen, dipped it in the ink, and drew a single, thick, black line through the entire document. She tore the paper in half, and then in half again, and dropped the pieces on the floor. Her contract with that world was finished. When she came out, the minister's wife, a kind, pale woman named Mrs. Davies, hurried to her. "Miss Finch. Oh, my dear child. What you have endured," the woman's eyes were full of horrified pity. "You must come with us. You cannot stay here. We have a room for you at the parsonage. You are an educated woman. When this awfulness is past, why? The town will need a school teacher. You could have a good life, a safe life." It was the very thing she had prayed for. A home, a purpose, a safe, clean room. Clara looked at the woman's soft, uncalloused hands. She looked at the small, fenced-in parsonage, a tidy box of a house. She saw the years stretching out tea with the ladies, spelling lessons, a slow, gray fading. It was the life she had been raised to want, and it felt, more than anything, like a cage. She looked past the woman, past the last building of Dry Creek, to the high, empty bluffs where the wind was blowing free. "Thank you, Mrs. Davies," Clara said, and her voice was gentle. That is kind, but my home is not here. My people are waiting for me." The woman's hand flew to her mouth. "People, you mean, the savages." She recoiled, as if Clara had confessed to a disease. "But my child, they are heathens. They are killers. They are the ones who saved me," Clara said. "The only killers I met here were wearing blue uniforms. Excuse me." She walked away, leaving the woman in a state of shocked, sputtering silence. She had one last stop, the Golden Spike. The saloon was quiet. The soldiers of the new regiment were under strict orders, and the townsmen were still in their homes, processing the day. Maggie was behind the bar, not drinking, but pouring cheap whiskey into a small travel flask. "So, you are going," Maggie said. It was not a question. "I am," Clara said. She stood opposite the bar. Two women who had been bought and sold, now meeting on new terms. "I heard the minister's wife," Maggie said, a wry smile on her painted lips, "offer you the schoolhouse, a respectable life, and you turned it down, to go live in a skin tent and eat roots." "Yes," Clara said. Maggie stopped pouring. She looked at Clara, a long, searching look. The cynicism in her eyes was, for a moment, replaced by something soft, something that might have been admiration. "Well, I will be damned," Maggie whispered. "You actually did it. You found a way out, not just from Holloway, from all of it." She came around the bar and pulled Clara into a rough, surprising hug, her cheap perfume filling Clara's nose. "You go on, then, honey, You go live that life." She pulled back, her eyes bright. "And if you can find freedom, really find it, in the arms of that warrior, you live it hard. You live it for the rest of us. You hear me? Live it for all the girls still stuck in this place." "I will." "Maggie," Clara said, her throat tight. "Be safe." "Oh, I'm always safe." "Honey," Maggie said, tapping her flask, "I'm just never free." Samuel was waiting outside with 2 horses. He had retrieved Clara's original mount. "It is time," he said. Clara mounted. She did not look back. She rode down the main street of Dry Creek, past the post office, past the fort, past the edge of the world she had known. She rode out into the open plains, the wind pulling at her hair, her buckskin shirt comfortable on her skin. He was waiting. He was not at the camp. He was waiting at the rendezvous point, the stand of cottonwoods by the stream, the place where they had kissed. He sat on his horse, alone, a dark silhouette against the bright sky. He was watching the town, waiting. He had no way of knowing if she would come. He had seen the minister's wife. He had seen her offered the safe. White world. He was a warrior, a leader of his people. But at that moment, he was just a man, terrified of losing his heart. He saw her ride past the last building. He saw her choose the plains. He rode out to meet her. He did not drive fast. He just rode, his eyes fixed on her. He stopped his horse 10 feet from hers. He just looked, his face unreadable, his eyes drinking her in. He saw her, alive, whole, and riding to him. "You came," he said, his voice rough. "You knew I would," she replied, her own voice unsteady. He shook his head, a small, vulnerable gesture that shattered her. "No, I was afraid. So was I," she whispered. "But I am not afraid anymore. Let's go home." He did not smile, but the tension that had lived in his shoulders for 5 years seemed to melt away. He reached out his hand, palm up. She rode forward and put her hand in his calloused. Strong fingers closed around hers, and together, without looking back, they rode west toward the camp. When they arrived, it was a scene of controlled chaos. The Comanche were not weeping. They were working. The teepees were already coming down, the long lodge poles bundled to be used as travois, dragged behind the horses. The women were packing cured meat, tools, and sleeping robes into rawhide bundles. The horse herd was being gathered. This was an exodus. The air was thick with the sadness of leaving, the grief of losing their ancestral lands. But it was not the despair of a defeated people. It was the grim, orderly relocation of survivors. They had not been wiped out. They had been given a chance, however small. Stone Woman, Tahan's aunt, saw Clara ride in beside her nephew. The old woman's face was a mask of grief. She walked up to Clara, her eyes black and hard. She said nothing. She just handed Clara a length of rawhide rope. Clara understood. She dismounted. She was not a guest. She was not a prisoner. She was one of the tribe, and there was work to do. She spent the rest of the day helping the women, lashing poles, packing bundles, her hands aching, her back screaming. She was clumsy. She was slow, but she did not stop. And for the first time, the other women worked with her, showing her the knots, pointing, grunting instructions. She was no longer white hands. She was, simply, Tahan's woman. By late afternoon, the great procession was ready, a long, winding snake of hundreds of people and thousands of horses, moving out of the valley that had been their home. They moved west, toward the setting sun, toward the dry, unknown emptiness of the staked plains. Clara rode beside Tahan. They were at the rear, guarding the column of women, children, and elders. A small detachment of Colonel Gideon's cavalry rode with them, not as guards, but as an escort, to ensure the terms of the treaty were met. They were being evicted. They traveled for days. The land grew harder. The rich grass of the plains gave way to scrub, rock, and dust. It was a harsh, unforgiving world. The Great War with the army was over, but the new daily war for survival had begun. They found a new place, a wide canyon with a weak spring, far from the railroad, far from the white man's towns. It was not home, but it was a place to live. Life was hard. The hunting was poor. The winter that came was cold. And the white man's cough, as they called it, Took two of the elders and a small child. There were internal conflicts, arguments over scarce food, grief that festered and turned to anger. But through it all, Clara and Tahan were a single unit. She was no longer an exile, and he was no longer a solitary grieving warrior. They faced hunger, the cold, and sickness as a family. She learned the language, her tongue slowly shaping the difficult, guttural sounds. She learned to scrape hides, to find edible roots, to laugh with the children, who now followed her everywhere, tugging on her shirt, asking for one of her strange Eastern stories. And Tahan, in the quiet of their teepee at night, would watch her, his eyes full of a quiet wonder. She had not just survived. She was beginning to belong. The great, violent conflict was over. The small, difficult, and beautiful business of living had begun. 3 years passed. The wind in the staked plains was a different kind of wind. It was cleaner, colder, and it did not carry the smell of coal smoke or whiskey. It carried the scent of sage and distance. Their new home was in a long, wide canyon, cut by a stream that ran full in the spring and dwindled to a trickle in the hot months, but never ran dry. The grass was rich enough for the horse herds, and small bands of buffalo still roamed the high mesas. The army kept its distance. The railroad, a thin iron scar on the horizon, had passed them by, 20 miles to the south. Clara and Tahan's home was not a teepee. Tahan, seeing her struggle through the first winter, had built a new thing. It was a small cabin, built of cottonwood and sod, sturdy against the wind, but its roof was not shingled. It was a round, high teepee, its cured buffalo skins letting the smoke out and the light in. Inside, a cast-iron stove Clara had traded for stood near a traditional Comanche cooking fire. There was a rough wooden table Tahan had built, and chairs, but the floor was covered in soft, painted robes, and the walls were hung with his weapons and his medicine shields. It was a house of two worlds. They had a son. He was 2 years old, a strong, sturdy boy with his father's night-black hair and his mother's clear, determined eyes. His name was Hawk. He spoke a tumble of 2 languages, Comanche and English, often in the same sentence. In the mornings, Clara would sit with him on a robe, her old Eastern primer, the only book she had, open on her lap. A, she would say, pointing, apple. Hawk would point to the sky. A, he would say, his voice bright. Pia api, mother. Tahan would watch them from the doorway, a look of quiet, profound wonder on his face. Then he would take the boy, set him on his shoulders, and carry him to the horse herd, teaching him the names of the colors, the feel of the wind, the language of the land. He was a child of the cabin and the teepee, of the book and the bow. Clara's story had become a strange piece of frontier lore. Sometimes, a lost traveler, a prospector, or even a new terrified mail-order bride who had fled a bad situation, would be found by the Comanche scouts and brought to the camp. They would be brought to Clara's lodge. Their shock at seeing a white woman, dressed in buckskin, her hair in 2 long braids, her voice fluent in the Comanche tongue, was a thing to behold. She would feed them. She would give them shelter, and she would tell them her story. She became a whisper, a legend among the hard-pressed women of the territories, the story of the bride who had been taken by the savages, but who, it was said, was not a captive at all. She was. The women would whisper, the only one of them who had ever truly become free. One day, Samuel Lone Fox rode into the camp. He had become a trader, a true bridge between the 2 worlds, trusted by both the army and the tribes. He brought news, and a packet wrapped in oilcloth. A letter, he said, handing it to Clara, from a woman in St. Louis. She said she knew you. Clara opened it. The handwriting was a careful, flamboyant scrawl. It was from Maggie. She had left Dry Creek. She had used the money she had saved to open a small hat shop. I am respectable now. Can you believe it, she wrote. But I am not nearly as respectable as you, honey. Your story got out. That bastard Holloway was court-martialed. They kicked him out of the army. He's a drunk somewhere in Arizona, they say. And Eli, that young private, he tells your story to every new recruit. Dry Creek is a different place. The women there, they walk a little taller. They do not take as much as they used to. You gave them a spine. Clara, you gave me one. Clara folded the letter, her heart full. She looked at Tahan, who was teaching Hawk how to hold a small, unstrung bow. He was no longer just a warrior. He was a leader, a man of counsel. The scars on his face were deeper, but his eyes were no longer haunted. He had learned, through her, a new way to fight. He had learned the white man's words. He had learned to read their maps, to understand their lies. He sat in council with the agents from the East, and he spoke to them in their own language of law and treaties. His voice firm, his mind sharp. He was the anchor of his people, adapting, bending, but never, ever breaking. Their love had not erased the past. The scars on the land were still there. The ghosts of his wife and son, the ghosts of her lost family, were always present. But their love had proven that two people could stand in the ruins of their old worlds and build a new one. They had built a small, warm house, right on the fault line of two nations. One afternoon, the sky to the west turned a deep, sickly yellow. A hot, angry wind began to blow, carrying the first taste of dust. A summer sandstorm, fast and violent, was bearing down on the valley. Hawk, who was now 3, ran to the cabin, his small body trembling. He was afraid of the dark, screaming wind. He hid his face in Clara's skirts. The wind is angry. Pia'api closed the door. The sky went dark. The wind howled, a high, thin wail, like a grieving woman. Tahan came in. He looked at his son, who was crying in terror. He knelt, so his eyes were level with the boy's. Clara watched, a small smile on her face. Tahan did not coddle the boy. He did not offer him a false consolation. He simply held out his hand, his large, calloused, warrior's hand. "Hawk," he said, his voice a low, calm rumble beneath the scream of the wind. "The storm is here. It is only wind. It is only the earth." He opened the cabin door. The wind tore at them, a blast of sand and fury. The boy cowered. "No, it is dark." Tahan's hand remained steady. "Come with me," he said. The words, the same words, spoken in the same steady voice. Clara's heart stopped. She remembered that first morning, in the canyon, a terrified girl in a tattered white dress. Given a choice, Tahan was not asking his son to flee. He was not inviting him to hide from the battle. He was inviting him to stand in the doorway, to face the wind, to smell the rain that was coming behind it, to live. Hawk looked at his father's hand. He looked at his mother. Clara nodded, her eyes shining. The boy put his small hand in his father's. Tahan led him to the doorway. Together, the man and the boy, they stood and watched the storm. Clara stood behind them, and she put her arms around her husband, her cheek pressed against his strong back. She looked at Tahan's eyes, watching the storm, and she saw in them what she had seen that first day on the ridge, the weariness, the intelligence, the truth. But now, they were not the eyes that had given her courage. They were the eyes that were her home, in the West. Men fought and died for lines on a map. They killed for gold, for grass, for the path of an iron-railed snake. It was a hard land, a land of ghosts and blood, and most of what was built there did not last. But what lasts is not the fence post. It is not a railroad tie. It is the story. It is the story of a hand, held out in the darkness. It is the story of a man who was brave enough to say, "Come with me," and a woman who was brave enough to answer, "I will go." Thank you so much for listening to our story. I would love to know where you are listening from, so please drop a comment below and share your thoughts. If you enjoyed this tale, please subscribe to our channel, Wild West Tales, and give this video a like. And if you really want to support us, please hit that hype button. It helps get this story out to more folks, and we sure would appreciate it.